and then with Michael Meadows over there, and then we do a coffee break. Yoren Eskand et Desmond and then we have lunch. For the afternoon, we had planned a visit to the Musée des Égouts, but apparently most of you would prefer to do something else. Okay? So, according to the feedback that we have, so we decided, because some of you prefer to go to Notre Dame, others prefer to go to the Louvre, others prefer to go to the Musée d'Orsay. So what we'll be doing is that we will take you to the hotel after the lunch. Some of you prefer to rest also, so we were told. So we'll take you to the hotel, and then you have the free afternoon, so you do whatever you want to do. And then we meet again at 7:30 for
L'Empreinte.
Yes, for the restaurant L'Empreinte. Okay, so but I don't know if you will be in the hotel.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can guide some of them to the.
Yes.
Yes.
So
what time?
Musée des Égouts.
Sorry.
Le musée des Égouts.
Les musées des Égouts. Donc si vous voulez y aller, oui, mais ça, ce qu'on est en train de dire, c'est que comme il y a plusieurs personnes qui veulent aller dans d'autres endroits, donc on va annuler la visite et.
Ah, triste.
Oui, c'est dommage.
C'est dommage.
Non, mais vous pouvez y aller, hein.
Vous pouvez y aller.
Ah bon, d'accord.
Mais non, ça c'est
Oui.
bien indiqué, etc.
Mais
Mais on peut parler après, mais la question c'est que la plupart, peut-être c'est que vous deux que vous voulez y aller, parce que la plupart nous a demandé est-ce qu'on peut rester à l'hôtel, est-ce qu'on peut aller à Louvre, est-ce qu'on peut aller à Notre-Dame, etc., etc. Donc c'est pour ça qu'on a trouvé que parce que à la fin il y avait que 2 ou 3 personnes qui voulaient y aller. So I come back to English, sorry. So sometimes I don't even realize what language I'm speaking. So then, so you leave from the hotel at what time to get 7:30 at? So this is.
The 20.
No. From the hotel to the restaurant.
To the restaurant.
Around 7.
Around 7.
Okay, so you leave from.
I look.
Okay, so but you leave from the hotel around 7. So basically, those of you that prefer to do shopping, etc., so you can do that, and then you meet at hotel and you leave with Stephanie to the restaurant. It's a different restaurant this time. Okay.
7 o'clock, right?
Sorry.
7 in the
7.
hotel.
Yes, 7. It's the last limit.
Okay.
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 All right.
To
Go with me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then you have the maps that Stephanie gave you. The maps have the location and all the transportation, etc.
It's not the same for this day, so I modified and I
Okay.
took.
And then we meet at 7:30 at the restaurant, okay, and we have dinner together. But of course, at those of you that want to go to the Musée des Égouts, you can go to the Musée des Égouts. Okay? Good. So now I pass the stage to Marcus.
Thank you. So, first of all, I would like to warmly thank Professor Luis Ostrovec and Professor Nuno Guimarães da Costa for their invitation to this CIPSH Academy. So, I'm going to speak to you about the interaction between plants and their ecosystems. Indeed, if you have a look to the plasticity of living systems, it applies first to all living beings, from single-cell organisms to hominids. And it involves constant, like survival or reproduction, and stable imbalance, like homeostasis, and sophisticated mechanisms for processing information as species evolve. And it has one major objective, it's to respond to environmental variations by creating a perception-action loops in order to ensure survival and communication between beings and their environment. if we have one thing to remember, it's that humanity accounts for only 0.01% of the Earth's biomass. The Earth has about 9 million of living species, but only 320,000 are plant species. But the plant biomass accounts for 83% of the Earth's biomass and 450 gigatons of carbon. To compare, fungi are about 12 and virus 0.2. But the animal biomass is about 0.5 with 1 gigaton for arthropods and 0.7 for fish. And the human biomass represents only 2.3% of the zoomass. Now, if we have a look to the perception scales in neuroplasticity for the brain, if we are going from the perceived world to the represented world, we have several steps of from molecular plasticity to psycho-socio-biological plasticity with cognitive plasticity and several steps and synaptic plasticity, which is very known. On the right side, sorry, in the upper side, you have a comparison of the time scale because it's very important. For neurons, we are about 1 millisecond. For muscles, about 3 milliseconds. For the heart, about 200 milliseconds. And if you take one of the most rapid conduction in carnivorous plants, we have about 2.5 seconds. We have to retain that for the next slide. If we compare now the same scheme for plants, for the vegetal plasticity, we are going from a perceived world to a non-represented world. But we have all the same steps from molecular plasticity to cognitive plasticity with specificity. For instance, for plants, you have perceptual learning, you have memory, you have also intelligent behaviors, and also an hypersensitivity to the environment, and also what we call the milieu. And I go to explain the difference between both. But for instance, you have photoreceptors on the upper side. You have also a very important chemical sensitivity, and the mycorrhiza, which is a bacterial fungal plant symbiosis. It's very important, and it's called it's the Internet of Plants, and it was called the Wood Wide Web. Because we have, it's well. The next one, I give several examples. For plant chemical sensitivity, you know all the fragrance of flowers, but also volatile organic compounds its VOX are very important. In tomatoes, for instance, you see here a lot of compounds that are emitted by plants. And also, you have the reprogramming of gross metabolism toward defense function in plants that are very important. And you have several steps this here from the detection of pathogen agents, for instance, the molecular response, early molecular response, and then hormonal interaction with, particularly with jasmonic acid, and then the transcriptional regulation with target genes, and chemical defense with the production of, for instance, alkaloids or some several kinds of drugs. Another example concerns the rapid movement of leaves. I don't know if you know Mimosa pudica, which is known as a sensitive. It's a plant that we have very quick, very rapid movement. If you touch them or if you blow, you can see immediately a movement of the leaflet, of the petioles, and also of the stem. So all the plant is totally modified, and very quickly the signal propagation is about 4 centimeters by second. and the triggering of the movement 20 to 30 milliseconds after the pulvinar action potential, pulvinus being a joint element here that permits the motor action, the motoric action. And I don't know the term exactly. Another example that equally you can really know is these trees that are bent with the wind. And it's also the case with water current or pertination, and that is due to what we call thigmomorphogenesis. It means that plants and trees, and it's a new discovery, are able to be proprioceptive. Proprioceptive means that plants can perceive their position in space and time as their own form, and they make a self-training. And so this allows them to control their movement, their curvature, etc., and to maintain verticality during the storm, for instance, and so to maintain a balance. Another example, also on some plants, like these two examples, Mimosa pudica on the right is able also to memorize. It means that if you touch the plant, it reacts immediately, but if you repeat the experience, it don't move. So there is an habituation like for animals. So it's a behaviors that are complex. And another plant which is named Desmodium gyrans, it's a plant that it names a dancing plant that is in Asia, but perhaps you know. It's very fun because she is very sensitive to sound vibrations with movements that very erratic. We don't know the exact mechanism, but I can explain that after. But this is in this both cases there is memorization and even learning by association that was shown by Galliano et al. When two or three kinds of different stimuli are applied to the same plant. But I can enter in the details. And finally, this history, I don't know if this history, perhaps have you heard of the kudu and the acacia. There was an abnormal mortality from kudus in the national park in the South African province of Transvaal in the 80s without explanation during 10 years, 15 years, until that one researcher understands that it was due to the poisoning by the tannins of acacias. And okay, it was that. So kudus are intelligent, so they moved away, but still mortality. Then it was due to the VOC volatile compounds emission, it's ethylene, that get around and the danger and warm their follows. So once more, the kudus has taken advantage of wind currents to avoid this contamination. So we say there are several steps of complex behaviors. Okay, so the next part concerns the bioelectrical part. Perhaps you are not. I don't know if you are you know this scientific aspect, but every cell has an electrical part. So two kinds of communication networks: short-range signal propagation, for instance, with intercellular communication with 1 to 5 centimeters by seconds, and long distance and propagation signal at the state of vascular or hydraulic systems, which transport liquids or sugars, for instance, to get energy and for photosynthesis. And it could be a bottom-up network from the xylem or a top-down from the phloem. indeed, we have published with a collaboration that I have with a Brazilian team, Professor Souza, which is a professor in, I don't remember the university, but the electrical dimension of plant life, it's very important to have in memory. Here it is active at the level of the membrane of the cell, but it is also active at all the level of the plant. So here you have all the classical bioelectrical events, for instance, action potential, systemic potentials, variation potentials, and also local potentials at the level of roots, of stem, or all the levels. And also on the high, on the upper part of the dia, you have what we call the EPGs, electrophytograms. It was a pioneering discovery that I done when I was a student, showing that there is also a spontaneous constant activity of very low voltage, and that have an important role in the relation life of plants. Indeed, I published in Plant Signaling Behavior in 2013 this paper explaining that there is a spontaneous extracellular potential variations in plants, and here you see that you have an activity which is very low. It could be assimilated to noise, but it's not noise. It's really a physiological response, and also spikes that can be induced by mechanical stimulation on the left side, and also by chemical agents on the right side. So the question were, do these low voltage variations, together with endocellular events, reflect integrative properties and complex behavior in plants? Does it reflect common perceptive systems in animal and plant species? Is the ability of plants to treat short-term variations and information transfer without nervous systems? There is no brain in plants, sure. And also, is a protoneural construction of the world by lower organisms possible? So many questions. Here, very quickly, the validation of this activity with MEA, which is a 60-channel multi-electrode array, which has examined the spatio-temporal distribution of this potential, and you see that it could be very noise, but it's not noise, absolutely not. And also that there is a synchronization between several tissue networks of the plant. And the collaboration that I have with Professor Souza of the Botanic Department of the Federal University of Pelotas has shown that they examine the temporal dynamics of this EPG, and also describe what we call the plant electrum, in analogy to the biome, the genome, the etc. The electron is the electrical dimension of all living system, and we show that there is a bioelectrical continuum, and also that there is specific electron signature associated with alteration of in situ of plants, or response to stimulatory patterns. Sorry. So to summarize, plants are anchored to the soil, are modular, self-organized, and medial structures that have evolved, developing new forms of communication and cognition with their environment. They are explored here for the first time in the context of mesological plasticity and their interactive ecosystem. So the electron could provide a form of access to experience, or a cognitive behavior, or to plants lacking brains and sense organs, but being hypersensitive and reactive to the environment. So the electron signature, as I said before, is can give of a given species or plant in response to a stimulus, indicates a cohesive factor and a unity of behavior that is observable in their unique environment despite the modulatory and non-individuality of plant systems. And it is possible to see that at the population scale, for instance, where you have resilient or empathetic strategies like cooperation or mutuality. So there is a new plastic and electronic framework for interpreting the levels of perceptual learning and cognitive behaviors of plants. So it's the paper that we do with Professor Souza recently about this question. So what is mesology? What is mesological plasticity? Plasticity, definition, is a variation in function or process linked to a lasting change in the material or a structure of a system subject of the action of an external force or environmental stresses. There is three major classes of lasting change. This phylogenetic plasticity regarding geological time scale or species formation. Epigenetic plasticity about the biological and individual time scale, so structural malleability, and metaplasticity, which is the ability of a mature system to reshape its own structure or create new entries into the system, typically synaptic and cognitive plasticity. So there is a transition from a system to a metasystem, and a mesological plasticity. We are going to see what I mean by this term. So the concept of mesology was introduced by the work of the pioneer of ethology, von Uexküll, which made a fundamental distinction between the Umwelt, the environment, the surrounding world, and the Umgebung, which represents the raw data of the environment. And Watsuji also, that describe at the same time the structural moment of human existence. And so the geographer Augustin Berg developed the modern concept of mesology by introducing the key concepts of medians, the foodosei, which is foodosei, dynamic coupling between the being and its environment, and in fact it's milieu, because it's not exactly the same thing, and the trajection, which means crossing the landscape, grasping analogous to a predication where reality is neither objective nor subjective, but trajective. Mesology is assimilated to the science of the milieu, as opposed to the current ecology. It lies between ecology and phenomenology, and is close to ecophysiology, a scientific discipline that integrates the behavioral and physiological responses of living organisms in a given context, to not limit to niches or a Darwinian adaptation, but taking into account the topological, biosemiotic, and ontological dimension of these links. So to summarize, the Umwelt of plant, the mesological plasticity, is then a new approach combining for the first time these two concepts, the epistemological concept of plasticity and the mesological concept of Berg, the later extended and applied to the Umwelt of plants. So this dynamic coupling between plants and their singular milieu defines a new form of plasticity that is distinct from developmental plasticity or epigenetic plasticity, and suits well with our proposition of plant as cognitively mediated interfaces using electrons as main vector for communication and information processing. So this concept is acting at the level of the entire plant, is underpinned by the inclusion by Beck of the plasticity index as that of the mesological relation R equal SS is the subject / PP is the predicate, and at local interactive ecosystem brought into play with each specific environment and a certain self-organization mechanism at the evolutionary level. So to summarize this table showing for plasticity you have three steps: plastic interfaces, which is an irreversible bonding which form plasticity complexes, complex in the meaning of complexio and not in the meaning of complexity, and it's made like an aggregate, and then a communing of metaplastic networks. For mesology, you have the dynamic coupling being milieu. The second step is the mediancy, or the structural moment for humans, and also a co-suscitation and this trajection for landscapes and other things. And mesological plasticity, as we say, is this link with the plasticity situated in the slash of the mesological relation. And really, it's not very known, but there is what I call a cognitive rhizome at the level of plant. Many people didn't know that, but for publication, I tried to detail that. You have situated cognition with agency versus environment. We have action-oriented feedback. You have behavioral control. You have also perceptual binding, minimal cognition. Calvo made a lot of paper. Distributed cognition regarding collective or dispersed intelligence or swarm intelligence. Extended cognition, it means that, for instance, it's what is used by the spider's web. It means that is an extension of the body. It's the equivalent to the smartphones for us. And you have also primary meaning making, embodied or enacted cognition in the meaning of post-cognitive theorist or Varela, and the methodological approach that we have described. Two papers if somebody need to enter in the details. And the last part of my talk concerning the plant-water relationship. Well, you know all that because we have discussed during the session of this clearly the 30% of the fresh water compared to the 70% of the glacier thermostat and the ocean, etc. Water concerning the water supplies of the Earth. What I would like to say here is that plants water the planet. And greening of the planet has increased global surface of water availability, but vegetation change have diverse local and remote impact across different regions. So I make 2 or 3 recent papers about this subject. Here, Fulton says that water is the solution of life, it's not new, that on land the critical supply is of fresh water, and also that plants must do with the water in their immediate surroundings, so whether it be abundant or scarce. And finally, that the traits that enable them to optimize water use in a range of hydraulic environments, subject to multivariate selective constraints, are the essence of the discipline of plant-water relations. Another paper, Oriana and collaborator, showed about the Earth's greening and climate change that reshape the patterns of terrestrial water source, try to quantify how vegetation dynamics influence global water availability through vegetation-related water sink and source scores, and also to understand this dynamic interplay between vegetation and water resource that could give us in implementing ecological restoration for the sustainable development of the water-carbon nexus. And the last one, showing of Chapman University, showing that a rapid return of water from ground to atmosphere through plants. So it's the first comprehensive global estimate of the amount of water stored in Earth plants. And they show that they indicate that the land use change may be homogenizing the global water cycle and contributing to its intensification by more rapid recycling water back to the atmosphere. And finally, that the transit time of water through plants is likely to be very sensitive to events such as deforestation, droughts, and wildfire, which will fundamentally change the time it takes for water to flow through the water cycle. And now some conclusive remarks. First, plants are eco-sensitive systems, and perhaps imagine green salvation for the future of humanity. The plasticity is so anchored to the ground, the plants are anchored to the ground and directly exposed to environmental stimuli, is intrinsically linked to their interactivity with the singular milieu and their mesological experience of the world, which is clearly different of the environment. The experience is expressed through a plastic and electronic interface of plant and a dynamic coupling between the being and the milieu, so the umwelt of plant, which differ from raw environmental data, the generation of affordances and complex behavior, some of which are biosemiotic in nature, including extensive adaptation, communication abilities, as well as the cognitive nature of plants. This constant management allows for adequate responsiveness, ensuring the plant's balance, growth, and direct exchanges with the environment and its unique milieu. It is therefore the entire plant body that constitutes an eco-sensitive cognitive interface capable of accumulating information and allowing sensitive access to experience without the need of a brain, in other words, a radical otherness, as Francis Allais points out. So this green memory, this source of life, these waterscapes and terrestrial reserves, these giant trees whose roots reach deep into the earth are potentially the best safeguard for humanity. And to finish, a comparison between the Symbiocene and the Anthropocene through the Asia a lesson for the future of humanity. First, as I said before, the mesological plasticity is linked to the ternary relationship between plant, milieu, world, including the plant-fungi symbiosis and the traversing landscape. Berg's projection is close to the Chinese and Japanese conception of a man in close relationship with nature. Indeed, the ecological awareness of the shogunate during the Japanese Edo period, the interior-exterior living space that are not separate, the terroir, which is an harmony between land and people, the Tao, with the Chinese culture and the Taoist philosophy, the mother of the world, Great South, traditional culture, the Tang Wang way, for instance, Chang in France, who explained very well all that, and the ecological pressure, the climate change, resource scarcity, especially water, and territorial disputes are now driving some Westerners to reconnect with nature. This healthy trend would benefit greatly from drawing inspiration from the ancient wisdom of the Far East. So Lao Tzu say, men follow the laws of the earth follows the laws of heaven follows the laws of Tao follows the laws of nature. So I will stop here. I will stop here. Perhaps just evoke if you need to read some papers about that. We have a selective bibliography here, and also I published a book recently, a transdisciplinary book, asking, are plants intelligent? But the question seems absurd. It's a purely anthropocentric view. Is it a media hype? A few years ago, it certainly would not have been asked. Do we speak of intelligence or sensitivity or many questions? And a new wave of science is sweeping through classical botany Since 2 decades, it's named Plant Neurobiology, leading researchers from all disciplines to reposition themselves on the signaling, communication, and behavior of plants. It brought about a paradigm shift because the questions asked went far beyond the scientific quest. And the plant kingdom needs to be revisited, leading us to re-examine transdisciplinary manner the fundamentals in the context of the climate crisis and growing co-anxiety. And this book gives voice to scientists, to philosophers, and also to artists with a transdisciplinary objective. Thank you very much.
Questions? Comments?
Thank you very much, Mark. I would only say something. What you bring in, we talked before, I think it's a different approach from what we are talking, most of us these days. But it is interesting because you bring a scientific understanding of plants' performance. But when we look back at how societies looked into waterscapes, very rarely water was isolated. In more recent depictions, yes, but normally water is associated certainly to fish, to beasts, wilderness, but to plants. Yeah. There's a very strong connection between water and plants. Probably the earliest representations of waterscapes relate to rivers, not that much to the sea, yeah. And they are strongly connected to agriculture.
Absolutely.
And there is an understanding among farmers of water being produced by plants, the importance of trees and so on, which we know is true, sure. But farmers know this, and probably since very early times they knew that. So it's very interesting that science moves in a direction that was empirically perceived in different cultural traditions.
And the actual context with plant neurobiology, for instance, that now is focused on signaling and behavior. So we speak of behavior of plants. So it was absolutely incredible for me because I'm a neuroscientist, and it was clearly in the background of animal biology, etc., and not in plants. But seeing all what I have described quickly here, you see that it's possible to speak about behavior in plants. And also there are many other points. For instance, in plants we can find some neurotransmitter-like, but there is no brain, and every living being have a form of intelligence. So for me, it's not really the problem. What we have to take into account is this ability to perceive the world, to react, but not only like an object, but like a subject. And it's quite a real difference. And also, as I said, this plants water the planet, and so these cycles is very important to include in our raisonnement.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That's really fascinating. My first comment is tongue-in-cheek, really, but I'm wondering where the vegans what the vegans might feel about this when they discover that there's cognition in the things that they're eating.
Cognition, yeah.
The fact that there's no brain, I'm sure, will be
There is no brain, so.
But more seriously, your examples are drawn, I think, primarily from the higher plants.
Yeah.
But I was thinking of the mycorrhizal networks
Yeah, yeah.
in the soil and how
Yes.
it appears that
Yeah.
is a means of communication across vast distances.
Yes.
And I wondered whether you
Yes, and
explored that at all.
yeah, yes, and it's enormous because when you have a tree that made several meters, you have the kilometre carré. You have an enormous area. Roots are able to communicate between the same species of plant, but other species of plant, and also they are able to manage all the distribution and for instance distribution of sugar, the gestion of energy, water when there is drought, where there is for instance an obstacle.
Obstacle, yeah.
Yeah, an obstacle. For instance, during their distribution, they choose to take another way and to take the best way, and they are able to communicate information with and at very large distance, and so we are now exploring that because we don't know really where we are going with that. But the terms of Internet of Plant or World Wide Web, it's interesting because it's really the case.
Any more questions? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael, welcome to the stage.
Sure. We have a... That looks good.
This one?
Yeah. Okay. This is...
Next.
That one's there. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Obstacle.
Well, thank you, firstly, for the invitation. I didn't have to come too far. I live in China. I only came from London, but it's been great to meet you all and so many diverse perspectives on things, including the one that we've just had, which was some of it was really quite complex science. I'm a physical geographer. I'm a geographer first and foremost, but a physical geographer, so that's my confession. I have an interest then, in particular, in the physical environment. But I feel that geography works best when it asks questions or tries to answer those questions that lie at the interface between different disciplines. And so my talk today, which is about waterscapes, I hope deals with where some of those interfaces lie. So I'm going to start with this term that we've heard a bit about. People have mentioned it on and off during the course of the last few days, this Anthropocene. It's a term that was introduced to science, at least, in the year 2000 by these two individuals, Eugene Stormer and Paul Crooks, and both of them are not geographers, they're biologists. And in the year 2000, they published hardly a publication, a little sort of pamphlet that used to be distributed by, we used to receive it in the post. Remember those days when you got things in the post? Called the Global Change Newsletter. And that was the first time it was ever used in what might be called the scientific literature. And you can see what's happened since then. It's a Google Scholar search taking annual accounting of the number of times this term appears in the scientific literature, and you can see exactly what's happened. So it's out there and everywhere. Interestingly enough, you may well know that the geologists, formerly the International Union of Geological Sciences, it's a sister union to my own International Geographical Union, has not decided to formally give this status of an epoch. So we haven't moved yet formally from the Holocene to the Anthropocene. But it's out there nevertheless, and I don't have a particular problem using it, as I've done so in several publications, including this paper. I've had, I suppose I put this here because it really describes what my day job is as a scientist, as a physical geographer. I spend a lot of time in lakes, or on lakes, or wetlands. There's certainly waterscapes. But I look not at the water, but the sediments that is accumulating in those lakes and wetlands. And to try and work out what those sediments can tell us about how things have changed through time. And so this is some of the key evidence that people have used actually for the formal recognition of the term Anthropocene. This particular study was from lakes in northern China, and it looked at mercury in those lake sediments, some 11 lakes, and you can see that basically the mercury levels kick off from about the 1940s, and particularly from the 1950s onwards, causing all kinds of problems. And that dotted line, as you can see, the boundary, some have argued would be a very useful division for the end of the Holocene and the beginning of the Anthropocene, but the geologists don't agree at the moment, at least. But thinking more broadly about the Anthropocene, what kind of threats we have, and I'm here now talking about the interface between the physical environment and society. And you can read that list for yourself, but these are all kinds of problems that we read about. Probably the most iconic of them is climate change. Very closely related to that is sea level rise. You'll see in a moment that land subsidence is a key issue, particularly in coastal cities, but not only. And then air and water pollution, urbanization, we're surrounded by that, that's highly relevant. And well, we're all, to a certain extent, tourists in the city of Paris this week. And these represent challenges, of course, for the physical environment and how we relate to it as human society. And if we think about waterscapes in the urban context, as in my case study will do so in a moment, we realize that these are highly vulnerable systems. So just to talk you through or walk you through some of these threats at the global scale, what does climate change do to urban waterscapes? Well, more intense flooding will lead to, or more intense rainfall will lead to urban flooding. We can get prolonged droughts associated with that, more extreme climates and heat waves. So changes in the flow leading to water scarcity perhaps. Rising temperatures produce algal blooms, in standing water at least, and the decline in water quality. Closely related, of course, is sea level rise, which brings all kinds of challenges in terms of flood control. There's greater variability in the climate, and we get very unstable seasonal responses in terms of runoff. And then these stresses compound, so it's not just climate change, but in combination with urbanization, for example, this amplifies the risk. Land subsidence is key, I said particularly, but not only in coastal cities. There are some particularly famous examples of this. I've never been to Venice. I think as a tourist these days, not regarded necessarily as being very popular there. You certainly have to pay, I think, now to get into Venice. But it's a city that's sinking. And it's caused largely by the extraction of groundwater, and actually also by the physical weight of the urban structures on land. So that problem is intensified because often, certainly a coastal situation, the groundwater is often saline, and that can cause the rotting and accelerated weathering of building foundations and so on. So coastal cities, as it says there, are especially vulnerable. Water and air pollution, industrial or agricultural effluents into the water, and of course domestic waste, and stormwater surges wash all kinds of nonsense into our waterways, particularly in the urban context. I think that's a repeat slide. Then urbanization, that would make very substantial changes to the urban hydrology, with increased flood risk, I've mentioned already, water pollution, of course, associated with that. And, well, my case study in Suzhou deals quite a lot with cultural heritage, And so these cultural waterscapes, the traditional lakes and canals, have often been filled in or replaced or built over in the process of urbanization. And then you get some complex feedbacks associated with the relationship between climate change and urbanization, in particular heat islands, changes in rainfall intensity, and again changes in flooding. Tourism is also a stress, of course, for these waterscapes in urban areas. Again, there'll be pollution pressure perhaps associated with that. The landscapes are getting altered, canals and lakes are kind of reshaped often for visitors, abused, I think, in some cases, perhaps even in many. General disturbance of ecosystems, literally the footfall, the numbers of people. That example there you can see is actually from Suzhou, and the kind of pressures that the tourism brings about these valuable cultural heritage waterscapes. And then we could have a debate about the commodification also of heritage, where waterscapes become kind of staged attractions, kind of Disneyfied in some sort of way. So I want to turn then to a case study. Suzhou is a city, I live in Nanjing. Suzhou is only about 45 minutes away on the train. It's my favorite Chinese city for all kinds of reasons. But it's a water town. It's dominated by water. As a city, the next slide I think should show the map. As a city, it's surrounded actually by several smaller water towns. You can see the landscape of the lower Yangtze is completely dominated by water. The river to the north, of course, is the Yangtze, which goes out at Shanghai. There's a very large lake, Taihu, next to Suzhou, or between Suzhou and Wuxi. And then many, many water features associated with this. It's not surprising that the city has grown up within water, in water almost, as a key element of its landscape. But it's a large city these days. It's, I think, in excess of 8 million people. It's a modern city, as you can see there, the photograph on the right-hand side, with very beautiful buildings from the last 10 or 20 years in particular. But it's an ancient city. It was founded more than 2,500 years ago. And it's also a city that has very great prominence as a center of cultural heritage. The whole city itself wasn't declared in 1997, but quite large parts of it were, in particular the classical gardens that I'll talk about in a moment. It's referred to in the literature sometimes as the Venice of the East, and has been celebrated by the saying, in Chinese at least, of heaven above, Suzhou and Hangzhou below. So water really is so prominent that it really structures Suzhou's economy, its form, and its culture, the canals, the rivers, and so on. Traditionally associated with the silk industry, it's now been transformed, as you can see, into a modern city with all kinds of economic activities. Now, the urban development that's taken place, and you can see it there, of course reveals tensions, particularly for the heritage waterscapes and cultural landscapes generally in this city. So if we think about a list, a kind of bucket list of where you would want to go to if you visited Suzhou, you would definitely want to go and see the classical gardens, and I'll talk about those in a bit more detail in a moment. The Grand Canal is a very obvious element of that, but there are very beautiful architectural features like these little courtyard and folk houses. There's canals I'll talk about in particular as well. The bridges, as you can see there in the slide, the city wall, largely destroyed, but there are still some elements of it. And then, typical of any Chinese city, you would have pagodas, temples, and museums. So to just look very briefly at the classical gardens, if you don't get an opportunity to visit them for yourself, they embody a good deal. I think I'm not Chinese, and I was not brought up in Chinese literature or Chinese history, but it seems to me these gardens embody the idea of a kind of a perfect environment where you bring together the elements of the plants, to a lesser extent animals, but certainly the birds and the insects are there. And the geomorphological features of the landscape, particularly the rocks. Probably the most famous of them is this, the humble administrator's garden, founded in 1509. There is the lingering garden, which was built in 1593. Description there suggesting these arrangements of rocks and plants and water. There's always water as a very strong element of these features. A harmonious place, a place of peace, and where you can connect with nature in a very direct way, as long as there aren't too many tourists there at the time. The Netmaster's Garden, another very famous one, originally built almost 1,000 years ago, restructured apparently in the 18th century. There is the Mountain Villa with Embracing Beauty, a more recent garden. You can see there the prominence of its limestone rock, of course, that is constructed there, or has been moulded, as it were, into these miniature landscapes. The Zhanglang Pavilion is the oldest. It is very nearly 1,000 years old. It's the oldest surviving Suzhou garden. And just to give you the last three, the Lion Grove, built in 1342, the Garden of Cultivation, 1541, and the Couples Gardens Retreat, built in 1874. Sorry, there is actually one more, the Retreat and Reflection Gardens. So these are places of harmony. They're places where you can go to contemplate the relationship between humans and nature. And of course they are recognized as globally important through UNESCO, and they were all 9 of these were given World Heritage status in 1997. That of course attracts a great deal of attention and a great number of tourists on an annual basis, which causes its own stresses. One other example relating to water is the Grand Canal. This is a fascinating feature to me. It's constructed basically 2,500 years ago. It's almost 1,800 kilometers long. It's regarded as the world's finest pre-industrial revolution example of hydraulic engineering. It too was accorded World Heritage status in 2014. It's an extraordinary feature. It runs from Beijing in the north and finishes not actually in Suzhou, but to the south in Hangzhou. And it connects several major river systems in eastern China, not least the Yangtze and the Yellow River. So it has enormous importance from the point of view of trade and movement historically. And now, of course, it has cultural significance as well as a waterscape. If you go to Suzhou, you'll certainly visit Pingjiang Street, which is in the older part of town, some distance away from the kind of high-rise that I showed you the picture of before. This is a quarter that is, of course, again, highly visited by tourists, and whose land uses has changed quite dramatically as a consequence of that, but it's at least a place in which these waterscapes are largely conserved. This is a very famous map, the so-called Pingjiang map of 1229, which outlines this historical area, much of which is still intact, not all, of course. This is a brass rubbing, or a rubbing at least, from a stone tablet that you can still see the original of in the museum in Suzhou. And you can see that there's a sort of rectangular pattern. These are the canals around which, of course, the residential and commercial properties were constructed. This is what it looks like in the present day. Clearly, the waterways there, and tourists, of course, moving up and down and buying what tourists buy, typically, which would be perhaps souvenirs and so on, to take home. But it still does retain at least the appearance of its traditional use as a place where people lived on the water or next to the water and engaged particularly in activities, mainly, of course, associated with trade. These days you'll find these tourist boats running up and down. And of course the bridges, very popular places for people in terms of photography. But the whole town really revolves around this concept of its waterscape. So where does this leave Suzhou in the Anthropocene? I've sounded a little bit like a tour guide for the last 5 minutes, but I want to turn into a physical geographer, or at least a geographer, and talk a little bit about what the threats are to all of this. And there's our same Anthropocene threats. How do they impact on Suzhou in particular? Well, climate change, this is temperature and rainfall time sequence from 1960 through to pretty much the present day, and the blue on the top is rainfall, and you can see that Suzhou is a wetter place than it was 40, 50, 60 years ago, and it's also a considerably warmer place. No surprises there. We all know about global warming, but the impact of that means that climate change has increased the risk of flood in Suzhou, which clearly is something that needs to be managed. Well, Suzhou is not a coastal city, but it's only about 100 kilometers from the China Sea, East China Sea, or at least from the estuary of the Yangtze. And it's only about 2 to 3 meters above sea level anyway. So any rise in sea level is going to at least indirectly impact upon the city itself, and of course its cultural resources and its waterscapes. And as it says there, that sea level is rising faster in East China than pretty much anywhere else, certainly within Asia. And that, again, increases the flood risk for Suzhou, something that needs to be managed. As if that's not enough, we have subsiding land, for reasons, again, largely associated with groundwater extraction. But I just would like to, you probably can't see them, but I can eyeball you in onto that little scale at the top. So most of Suzhou is under blue, quite dark blue, and that means that it is sinking somewhere between 24 and 40 millimeters annually. So that's 2.5 to 4 centimeters annually. That's definitely something that is going to increase the risk of flooding, as indeed the little bullet point at the bottom will say. Pollution. Suzhou is also, unfortunately, polluted. This is the Grand Canal, data from the Grand Canal. You see a nice picture of it, a sort of tourist brochure. All looks very nice, but actually it's seriously polluted. These two lines, you can see here, these are sampling sites along the canal in the vicinity of Suzhou in this particular paper. And the dotted line that you can see there, I don't know whether I don't think the pointer will actually work. The dotted line that you can see there is the sort of constant safety level. And for the two heavy metals here, the top one is chromium, the bottom one is copper. And you can see that that continuous dotted line, well, the dotted line's not continuous, but it refers to continuous levels of a particular element. That on pretty much all of those data points, those sampling sites, the levels of chromium and copper exceed. And in fact, they exceed the solid line at the top, which is the maximum recommended, as it were. This is a canal that's in, I think, rather a poor state as far as its water quality is concerned. Then we have urbanization. I mentioned, of course, that it's a rapidly growing city. These little in-blocked maps that you can see along the top from 1985 through to 2022, you can literally see the urban sprawl and the built-up area time sequence on the bottoms is fairly obvious. This has been a very, very rapidly growing city, and rapid urbanization and associated transport infrastructure is threatening the integrity of Suzhou's cultural heritage and, of course, its waterscape. So typical views of, this is within that historical area, actually, where there's quite a lot of reconstruction going on. One hopes that it's now conserving at least that cultural heritage, but I don't think it always did by any means. Not much attention paid to that perhaps in the past, and sometimes urban development is maybe architecturally very interesting, but I'm not sure that it's in harmony necessarily with the kind of image that Suzhou, I think, would like to portray. And then finally, tourism. Tourism numbers have increased. Again, it's a time series course, 2021, 22 and 23 were very strongly impacted by COVID. I don't have figures for 2024, but it looks very much to me as though the linear increase has once again been restored. It's a busy place for obvious reasons. So we have problems for Suzhou, and let me say now that the city authorities are well aware of these problems, but we also have tools that we can help the city to resolve them. In particular, we have geospatial tools. As a geographer, this is quite close to my heart, with remote sensing, with geographical information systems and the ability to model. So we have GIS platforms, we've got modeling tools, and that this can have a transformative impact on the way our urban landscapes in general and the waterscapes can be managed in future. So there's a lot more information out there, and we can, with machine learning and artificial intelligence, we can detect patterns over time, and we can use those patterns to engage in forecasting or predictive modeling. So these are systems that are adapted. AI tools can learn from the data that's coming in. Pretty much near real-time monitoring now is possible. And so flood risk management and so on does definitely become easier with these sorts of tools. In terms of detecting change, remote sensing is particularly important. We can go back, of course, to aerial photography. With satellite images, the 1980s onwards gives us some very detailed information. I put these three maps together because they actually show how the waterscapes of Suzhou have been reduced since the 1960s. So you just keep your eye on the right-hand side there, and the blue, in a general sense, means water. Some of the solid blue areas that you can see, they're obviously lakes interior to the city. But as we go through the time sequence, you'll see that the intensity of that blue has reduced as the waterscapes have themselves been impacted and reduced, particularly the filling in of canals. So it's almost like a shrinking waterscape in Suzhou. That's the 1980s. And then finally, the 2010s, I think there's just three. We don't get the 2020s. The paper didn't have those data. But there are other tools. We certainly globally, there are examples of where citizen science is being used. You have an incredibly powerful computer in your hand. Probably some have got them in your hand right now. That you can, through crowdsourcing information, we can map, and we can actually, I think, reconnect people in a sense with their waterscapes. So there are all kinds of mobile apps. WeChat, of course, is particularly prominent in China, that can give information and feedback about, for example, flooding and pollution or algal bloom events. And then there are other possibilities mentioned there, community heritage mapping. Also, of course, we'd like to improve education of the general population and the tourists. To what extent that's being done, I'm not sure, but it certainly represents a strong possibility to improve these threats of the Anthropocene. And then, of course, the social benefit, if you like, reconnecting people with water. And that ultimately would aid, one hopes at least, governance. So big data, the enormous amount of data that's now available with sensors and satellites, and we bring in that citizen science as well, that we need decision port platforms, and we can integrate those data and test, if you like, what if this happens, what if that happens. And or theoretically, you can increase dramatically transparency and accountability. Open data enables better governance. I'm not sure to what extent that's feasible in China, but it's certainly globally a way that can be harnessed. And then, in terms of the urban future, this evidence-based policy making to adapt to climate and sea level rise and pollution, and then hopefully to help preserve this waterscape heritage that I believe is so important. So just a couple of final reflections on that slide. I think it would be nice if we went beyond simply remediating the waterscapes of Suzhou, or anywhere else for that matter, from a simply technical point of view, that we need, I think, to think about integrating our understanding of ecology with our respect for the cultural heritage of these waterscapes. There are examples, of course, of restoration, not yet apparent, it seems, in the Grand Canal, but cleaning of canals and so on, and the development, not in central Suzhou, but elsewhere in the Yangtze Valley, of the development of ecological corridors and so on, and wetland parks. And I think there's some effort to kind of revalue our cultural heritage and not just simply see it as a tourism resource. So this, of course, all speaks to the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm very taken by the idea in China of ecological civilization or eco-civilization. I think it's something that for the moment is perhaps we're only really paying lip service to that, but as a concept, I really do, and of course it's beautiful China as well, which is an element of that. I really do sense that there is willingness, at least at various levels of government, to embrace this concept, and I think it does hold out some hope for the future of the kind of situation I've outlined here in Suzhou. There are some comparative lessons, of course, to be learned from Venice, from other water towns like Amsterdam, and indeed the Cape Town water crisis that I spoke to in asking a question or making a comment on one of the papers yesterday. It's also something perhaps we can learn from. So Suzhou, I think, is a model example of human-water coexistence. It's not always harmonious, but I think we see some great opportunities for that harmony to be celebrated in the future. So with that, I will thank you and appreciate your comments and questions. If you are interested in reading a bit more about this, we did publish a paper earlier this year, and you can get a copy of that if you want to scan the QR code. It will take you straight to the paper. Thank you very much.
Questions, comments?
I think it's a wonderful case study, and I was wondering, because there are many water towns along the Yangtze River. Suzhou, of course, is the biggest, one of the biggest cities, but there are many of these water towns that are along, the river. Is that Suzhou is the only one that is looking at this problem, or there are also other interests in other?
They're certainly all facing the problems.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think that any city manager in the Lower Yangtze has to take cognizance of the processes that are going on around. How much technical knowledge there is about them, I couldn't say. But any city manager is trying to control floods, of course. I suppose what I'm saying is that if they're controlling floods to a particular level now, they've got to think about what it would be like in 10 or 20 or 30 years' time with that combination of subsidence, sea level rise, and more rainfall. So this is a moving target in terms of managing floods in particular. Is anyone sharing, or must I choose myself?
Yes, so go on.
Okay, it's me. Okay, thank you very much. This is really wonderful. I have been to Zhuozhenyuan. It's like a replica of the Daguanyuan the Grand View garden from Red Chamber, the story of Red Chamber. So in the story of Red Chamber, the water of the garden actually is, flowing in and out. In other words, there is a kind of circulation, between the inner water and the external water. So when the external water comes out, this is the representation in literature. It pollutes the water in Daguanyuan, in that, Red Chamber setting. So in other words, you talk about Grand Canal. How about the river or the lake in Zhuozhenyuan? that is again in a kind of enclosed garden. So I don't know, because you're a geographer and I'm literature, humanity person. So I look at ray chamber. So the water in the garden become polluted because of the transmission between the external and the internal sources of the water. Is that happening in Zhuozhenyuan? And the other question is, Suzhou is the downstream of Yangtze River, but upstream there are a lot of flooding occurrences happening throughout the past decade. For instance, Fenghuangcheng in Hunan. It was terrible that even, that the whole city, the Fenghuang famous city, has been severe damaged because of the flood. But I had never heard of the Grand Canal in Suzhou having such very, significant damage over the last year. But I can be wrong because I am not following that. So in other words, even with the river, Yangtze River, is there any differences between what happened in the upstream river city and then the downstream?
Yeah, look, there's a difference in scale here. The Yangtze River versus the Grand Canal. And if you're talking about something which is big, Grand Canal is 1,800 kilometers long, and you saw how wide it is. But there's a whole system of locks and gates and so on to control the level of that. Probably fairly easily, at least, with that technology. And you're talking about a river the size of the Yangtze. It's the largest river in Asia, which clearly floods on a quite regular basis, causing the kind of disruption that you spoke about. And that can only increase, of course, with climate change, because the frequency and magnitude of extreme events we know is already increased and is likely to continue to do so until we turn some kind of corner that doesn't seem to be very likely at the moment with global politics where they are. So that's a much bigger problem and not easily solved. Again, though, as I said to the previous example, the city managers will be aware that they need to control floods, but sometimes the events are just overwhelming. But if at least we have good flood early warning, and we have the kind of monitoring and these geospatial tools that I spoke about that can provide much better early warning, that we can use those mobile phone networks to get that information out so people are able to evacuate more easily and so on, then at least the damage will be restricted to infrastructure and not to lives.
Lee, just one last question, and then we'll do our micro break.
Yeah.
I think you're wonderful sharing. I really learned a lot. As you know, I'm a historian, right?
Yes.
So I want to share some information to you, because the water scale of Suzhou are full of Confucian ideas in the eyes of Chinese literary officials during the Ming and Qing dynasty maybe from the 17th to the 19th century, right? And by writing points and texts on waterscapes, it is proven that the officials are literally, they are cultural elites and they control everything. So the waterscape is very important for them. That can prove they are cultural elites. They can control everything. And besides, I think very much more interesting that waterscape spread very quickly through printings in China, even spreading to Korea and Japan. I think that later, influencing the later creation idea of waterscape imagination to other states. The same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was struck yesterday, I think we were talking about Taoism and the central element of water in that philosophy, and then of course Confucianism. I don't know anything at all about either of those philosophies other than really by name, and I know that they're important ways of interpreting the relationship between people and the environment, but that's clearly why these resources, I call them resources, but why they exist in the first place, is really an expression of one or other or both probably of those philosophies. But they're great. I'll be a tour guide again and say, please come to Suzhou. Come to Nanjing and then you can go to Suzhou.
We have to go. Yes, Elaine. Just one last question.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this fascinating paper.
I just had a small question. You showed us several maps with the reducing the waterscapes in
Yeah.
Suzhou. Does it mean that we should, on the contrary, add more water or leave more space to the water now compared to 1960s when it started to be reduced?
I mean, the maps are showing surface water. The water's still there, of course. And
Oh.
while we were driving here, you made the point about this used to be a river and then it became a railway,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So it got covered over. The river got covered over and forgotten about, and abused in many respects.
Okay.
And that, in a sense, is the same thing as happened in Suzhou. It's not that the water's been drained off there. It's not drier. It's gone underground. It's been covered over. The canals have been paved over and built on. And in that sense, the waterscapes have been disrespected. So there's a parallel here in Paris.
Thank you. So, let's just do a coffee break and we reconvene at 11:10.
Right on time.
Yes.
Yeah, I stay in Kyoto University in Tokyo for 2 years.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Great pleasure.
Vous commencez quand vous voulez.
Thanks to Nuno, where is he?
Yeah.
And to all of you for being here, Nuno for his invitation, and thanks to all of you to being here. So I will today speak about 3 points. My first point will be about landscape and waterscape. And my second point will be about the traditional Chinese landscape and water management. And my third point will be on Chengshi Shanshui and waterscapes. So I will explain about that. I'm a sinologist, but I'm also a specialist of Chinese painting and calligraphy. And in China, I'm known as an artist, painter and calligrapher. That's why I'm going to speak about it. First, in English and in other languages, the term waterscape is defined in dictionaries as a picture or view of the sea or other body of water. It's in Western languages, it's used to describe a body of water and its surrounding environment, as we have seen these 3 days. This can include oceans, lakes, rivers, and man-made bodies of water. Waterscapes are characterized by the movement and reflection of water, as well as flora and fauna that exist within and around them. On the other hand, landscape refers to visible features of an area of land. This includes features such as mountains, hills, valleys, plains. Although bodies of water can also be included, the focus is on the land itself, as some of you have said already. Dictionaries define landscape as a portion of land or territory which the eye can comprehend in a single view. So that means that the gaze creates a distance and a separation between what is being looked at, the land, and the beholder. This is probably because the term landscape first appeared in the context of painting in Europe. The first known occurrence of the word landscape in French, in German, in English, outside of a dictionary dates back to 1529. So this is the reference of the paper. And the first painting of landscape in Europe is this one. Why? Because this painting of Conrad Witz is the representations, it's figuring recognizable landscape. It's the Lake of Geneva with its surroundings. The Chinese translation of waterscape is 水景, literally water scenery, though this term is a recent translation of the English name. So the expression does not exist in traditional Chinese. Nevertheless, many Chinese paintings depict something that we could call landscapes or waterscapes, even though the concept doesn't exist in Chinese, especially during the 12th century. I'll just give 2 examples of very well-known paintings. However, in Chinese, the term waterscape and landscape do not have the same meaning as they do in English. More precisely, the definitions of landscape and waterscape are different in Chinese. Traditional Chinese painting include numerous landscapes, as we can see here, referred to as mountains and waters. this expression is dedicated to pictorial and literary landscapes. You have other terms to describe other forms of landscapes, like the perceived landscape. It's, for instance, it's feng shui. Fengguang, which means the wind and the light. So we have other terms. The Chinese landscapes, Shanshui, mountains and waters, feature no perspective, as you can see here, no shadows, no reflection in the water, and you don't have either a single point of view. Furthermore, such landscapes explicitly do not imply any division, no boundary, no spatial or temporal limits. In other words, there is no horizon. The definition of horizon in Western languages is a limit. So conversely, the pictorial landscape consists of mountains, and you have water in those, mountain and waters as well. So it consists of mountains corresponding to the Yang principle, which is verticality, self-facing slopes, the sun, masculinity, etc., and water, which is the Yin principle, horizontality, the moon, femininity, etc. Sorry for the Chinese, they all know that. But what is important is that this immediately embodies a cosmogonic whole, of which the painting, the painter, the viewer, and the world around them are an integral part. So there is no separation between me and the world around me and the painting. Such a conception makes, so it goes, of course it's close to what you called just a moment ago, the medial approach. You have no objectifying gaze, it's impossible. There is no separation between me and the world, the painter and the world. And that's why in Chinese painting you have many examples of the painter going to the painting and disappearing. Even in the official annals, you have such stories. For example, you have an emperor during the Tang Dynasty, 8th century, who said to the painter, please change the cascades you painted on the painting, because they disturb me at night, I can't sleep. So that's it. It's in the historical annals. So in traditional Chinese painting, water refers not only to running water, rivers, waterfalls, but also to lakes, to clouds, mist, vapor, as well as the sky, snow, rain, etc. It's the complete water cycle from earth to sky and back again. Water often connects the different parts of a painting, as we have seen, for example, in this one. So it's difficult to make a separation between landscape and waterscape, like in English. You cannot imagine that in traditional Chinese so-called landscape culture, 山水文化. And from a technical perspective, water is also essential for the material aspect of painting. Ink can only be applied to paper if it's mixed with water. This process is known as ink washes, as you can see in this painting. If we have a philosophical approach, mountains and waters embody positive virtues related to wisdom and to immortality, both in Taoism and in Confucianism. In Taoism, as some of us said already, water is considered to be wuji, which is boundless and unlimited. It is an image of chaos and of primordial indistinction, as well as the flow of thought. You cannot stop it. For Lao Tzu, the highest goodness is like water, 上善若水. For Confucius, the benevolent enjoy the mountains, the wild, enjoy the water. So this is all this is positive, of course. And water, as one of the 5 essential phases of Chinese classical gardens, holds equal importance to the mountains in traditional natural landscape gardens. So this is an inkstone made of porcelain, ceramic, where you can see mountain and water. It's probably the first type of represented garden, officially represented garden. Water, as a highly versatile and design element, can form various forms such as a flat, mirror-like ponds, flowing waterfalls, streams, etc. Beyond its role as a purely aesthetic feature in garden landscape, water also serves numerous practical functions. For example, cooling the air, reducing noise, irrigating land, of course, and providing means for landscape design. Water, of course, in nature takes on countless forms, and in the garden as well. The sound of the water also provides aesthetic enjoyment, and it's stirring imagination, of course. It's very important in garden design. And elsewhere, the traditional Chinese garden is an earthly paradise. For traditional Chinese people, paradise is a place, an elixir for long life, which grants immortality. And you can find it in the garden. According to many legends in the Chinese annals, historical annals, the elixir of immortality can be found in the mountains where the immortals live, either in Western China or in distant oceanic islands. And the garden is a representation of this paradise on earth. The paradise, this is an island of the immortals, which is symbolized by this rock, this vertical rock. It's not associated with sin, with transgression or original loss. It's a pure Eden, a place of longevity. It's purely positive, and you have no sin, never. So Chinese gardens are typically designed around a water feature, here, that occupies around a third of the space. Sorry, this is the water feature. So this feature, therefore, it plays an essential role. Although the water in the garden is fresh, it does symbolize the ocean where you can find the islands where the immortals live. When they see these beautiful islands in the garden, the immortals, of course, will come in the islands. So that's why you see them on these rocks. So, of course, water contributes to the contemplation of the garden's forms. It's a spectacle for the ears with the waterfalls and the fishes, and for the nose with the lotus ponds. When it rains, the water falls on the lotuses, and you have a beautiful fragrance. It also serves to reflect the arrangement around the pond. It's feminine, all-encompassing, an element that represents the opening towards infinity. Of course, we cannot see the beginning and the end of water. There is always a stream running through the garden. That's why you have an outside and an inside, as pointed before. The stream running through the garden is akin to the path of thought toward infinity. The flat surface of water feature, like pond or basin, it acts like a mirror. It's amplifying our perceptions and its surroundings. In the I Ching, the Book of Changes, water symbolizes lightness and communication. It carries the nourishment of life as it flows through valleys and plains. Water also symbolizes dreams and infinite spaces. The shape of the pond in the garden often conceals its edges from the viewers of the other side. They create the illusion of infinite extension, as we can see here. And the softness of water contrasts with the solidity of the rocks. Water also reflects the sky, so it's always changing. And that's why it's so important in the Book of Changes. So the garden design is, of course, a kind of natural waterscape management. But, and this is my second point, what is the link between landscape, traditional Chinese landscape, and water management? Is there any relation? So if we have an anthropologic approach in China, maybe, is it because the scale of the mountains and rivers, which are amongst the highest and longest in the world, maybe this scale probably led the indigenous people to recognize their own limits and the limits of the human capabilities, and they had to focus on a way to coexist with the non-human force of water through continuous negotiation. This undoubtedly contributed to the development of their unique cultural heritage and wisdom. That's why, well, to my sense, in traditional Chinese culture, water is something that is not considered to be controlled, managed instead of controlled. Marianne Bastide talked to us about that. Water is not conceived separate from mountains. It's not separate either from the human beings or from the heaven. Human beings are part of a cosmogony which combines water, mountains, earth and heaven, high and low, liquid and solid, flexible and rigid, and so on. Although Chinese poets and painters started to paint landscapes and to write about landscapes during the third to fifth centuries, these are two examples of painters who wrote the first treatises on painting, on shanshui painting, mountains and waters painting. Although they experienced the landscape, they had no conception of being separated from what they were looking at or what they were painting. They considered themselves to be part of it. However, we can say that although there is no conception of trying to control the water, though there is a kind of water management, as we have seen in the gardens. I will just give 3 examples that have been already spoken about. The first one is the myth of Yu the Great. He was credited, he is a legendary king in ancient China. Legendary, that means he didn't exist, of course. He is credited with the first successful state effort at flood control, and he is credited to be the first one to have thought about and to have created the Grand Canal. The second example is, of course, the management of water through the irrigation system of Dujiangyan that will be spoken about by Desmond in a moment. In 256 before Christ, here is a picture of Dujiangyan, because we are speaking about it and we didn't see any pictures yet. And of course, the best example, we have seen many pictures just a moment ago, is the Grand Canal, which is the longest artificial waterway in the world and a world UNESCO World Heritage Site. So actually it was built during several centuries, as Michael has explained just a moment ago, so I won't speak about it. So the Grand Canal. The 2 conceptions, the mountains and waters on one hand, the shanshui landscape, and Chinese water management like in Dujiangyan or in the Grand Canal, are not incompatible. This, as Marianne has pointed out, it's not a control, but it's a guidance of the water. It's trying to follow the water and to help the water go away and not to flood all the time. China has always had a strong technological and mathematical development. However, this is not related to the notions of progress, of control of nature. On the contrary, it's deeply connected to ancestral, religious, and popular beliefs concerning the relationships with the forces of nature, such as mountains and rivers, shanchuan, which is not shanshui. And there are sacrifices which are, we saw that yesterday in Musée Guimet, such sacrifices which are offered to mountains and rivers, important mountains and rivers. And the invention of compass, for example, is related to the idea of honoring the dead by choosing an optimal location for their graves, because their well-being is believed to depend on that of their descendants. The compass is used in cytology, feng shui, and the Taoist science of assessing and analyzing sites. So humans adapt to the site, trying to fit in the site without disturbing it, and if possible, orienting the site to their advantage. Accordingly, it is believed that abundant harvests and an absence of wars or calamities depend on a harmonious relationship with the mountains and rivers. And I would arrive to my third point. The term waterscape is more associated with contemporary period than with tradition. However, it's through art and artists that we can establish a connection with the traditional concept of waterscapes and in the meaning of aquatic landscapes. Interestingly, in his paper, Subscribing Sustainability, the Production of China's Urban Waterscapes, Jesse Rodenweicker demonstrates how urban planning in China is transforming urban landscape into what he calls new urban waterscapes, or what is referred to in his paper as the Shanshui city. So that is very interesting. Today the term Shanshui city is used to talk about new urban waterscapes. So I just talked to you about what is Shanshui in the traditional meaning of Shanshui, and now it has a new meaning. So I will try to explain this new meaning through the artist, because 25 years ago, in the early 2000s, there was a biennial ink painting exhibition which was held in Shenzhen, and I participated as an artist. The theme was Chengshi Shanshui. At the time, combining Shanshui and Chengshi was considered completely inconceivable. Why that? It's stupid. Today, however, Chengshi Shanshui has evolved into a new approach to urban planning, seemingly based on waterscapes, according to the paper I talked to you, Jesse Rodenweicker here. And, well, the topic was of this exhibition, of this biennial in Shenzhen, was Chengshi Shanshui. It was an international biennial exhibition of ink painting, also known as the Ink Wash Painting Exhibition of Shenzhen. So this exhibition caused quite a stir in China at that time. And the artist said, no, that's not possible. We cannot participate. So the organizers decided to change the title slightly, and they chose a new title, 水墨画业都市, Ink Wash Painting and the City. So that title was accepted, and the exhibition was finally a success, and there was a symposium, and all critics and artists had a controversy and spoke about this question. By definition, why? The subject matter of mountains and waters is incompatible with the city, 城市 or 都市. As you have seen, it never depicts urban landscapes. So this raises two questions. Firstly, why choose such a contradictory theme? And secondly, why, since Shanshui, mountains and waters, refers to a pictorial theme, and 水墨, ink painting or ink wash, refers to a technique and a medium, they are not semantically, they don't have the same meaning. You cannot change one to the other. So why replace Shanshui with 水墨? So you also have several other Chinese expressions that can refer to different nuances of landscape without limiting it to mountains and waters. But anyhow, this change in title provoked effective, there were a large number of Chinese artists who participated finally, and some of the works dealt directly with the city or urban landscape using ink washes, and some others were about the impressions of modern city life. So the theme of ink painting in the city refers to landscape and urban environments, and since then the biennial has revisited this theme on several occasions. In fact, the reason why 城市山水 could not be accepted was that Shanshui refers directly to classical Chinese painting, whereas ink wash or ink wash painting, 水墨, is a term that has referred to contemporary Chinese painting since the 20th century. In traditional painting, 水墨 simply means ink and wash. However, in the modern sense, 水墨 refers to any form of ink painting, which is not necessarily based on brushwork, unlike Shanshui painting, which is always based on brushwork and calligraphy. So ink painting is based on water and its interaction with ink. For example, Zhang Daqian invented splash ink painting. His compositions are based on washes, brush strokes, which are added afterwards, contrary to the traditional painting. So today, so that's why it was replaced by 水墨, which refers to contemporary Chinese painting of the 20th century. So today, we're talking about 水墨都市画, a theme that has become popular among painters. This highly regarded form of painting is the subject of contemporary art exhibitions at museums such as the Guanshan Mei Shu Guan in Shenzhen. In English, it's the Museum of Guanshan. And this museum attracts numerous buyers and visitors. Here you have the posters of two of those biennials in 2008 and 2010. By contrast, so this is an impression of one of the painters and who is one of the organizers, Dong Xiaoming, and the ink wash world. And actually, what is interesting is that architects embrace this concept of 城市山水, meaning landscape city, as you can see in the work of Ma Yansong, who was born in 1975, and most notably in his forest city in Chongqing. Finally, it was not built up, but this was the project. And as you can see, you have a forest city inside the tower. And he built finally an ultimate tower in Canada, in Mississauga. So according to Jesse Riedenbacher, as I started with, the concept of 城市山水 has become a purely Chinese nationalist tool used to give urban planning an identity. The original meaning of 山水 as a cosmogonic concept has been completely forgotten in favor of a nationalist and identity-based propaganda. His research shows that the population does not perceive the particular benefits of such urban planning in their daily lives. He argues that the lack of resonance with everyday residents' urban experience shows the dearth of power to narrativize urban development outside of state circles. So why Chengshi Shanshui? Because they correspond to what geographers in China call waterscapes, 水晶. I would just like to conclude and to say that as a conclusion, these are several papers you can read about this conception of waterscapes in urban planning. So as a conclusion, there's a few paintings of this biennial in Shenzhen. Water is by no means merely an aesthetic object. It also plays an active role, carrying its own geographical and historical context, while preserving the emotions, memories, projections, and works of the humans and non-humans who depend on it for their livelihood. And that is what is showed in these paintings during the biennial of year 2000. So just a few examples. And here is the last one. So thank you for your attention.
Questions, comments?
Yes?
Yolande, I think this 山水城市 idea is a really interesting concept. But in fact, I think in China, the first person who proposed it was in fact a rocket scientist, Qian Shuisen, in the 1980s.
Yes.
So I was wondering, whether that line of thinking, putting forward something which is more scientific, although, he was adopting, this very poetic concept from the Chinese tradition. I think that the closest lineage is perhaps Ma Yansong, right, in the architecture.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering, whether that lineage of idea has any impact on the artistic creation.
Yeah, of course, it has impact on the artistic creation. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine in year 2000 it was just impossible to conceive. Chengshi Shenhui, it had no meaning. The artist would say, that's stupid, it has no meaning. And the organizer had to change the title of the exhibition. It was not accepted. And 25 years later, it's common. It's completely common. So of course it changed, yes.
But I think when it was proposed in 1980s, the academic people were all taken with attention, what this idea is about.
What is it? Yes. And well, actually, Ma Yansong was the first one to do something with it.
Yeah.
This project was just tremendous, and finally built up in Canada in 2010. 2010, yeah. Yes.
I think I heard you mention. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I heard you mention that water represents yin in Shanshui painting.
Yes.
Okay, but my understanding is maybe it's a bit more complex than that. Sometimes people say, 一动一静. The mountain is static, right? The water is flowing, and therefore yin yang. So the thing that's not moving is static, that's yin, and that the thing that's moving is yang. And there are all other ways to characterize, to talk about the yin yang position in Shanshui paintings by saying the 山南为阳，水北为阳. So in this framework, you talk about yin yang in terms of whether or not it can receive sunlight. So, and also, there are other schools who talk about yin yang in terms of everything. So every object or every place in the painting can have both sides. Yeah. So I guess maybe water cannot be characterized as only representing yin. It could be mountains, but some would consider mountains are yin. Mountains represent yin and water represent yang.
Is it mountain or is it rocks?
Or
Is it mountain or is it water?
山与水,山水.
My question is
一动一静.
No, what my question is, when you look at this painting,
Mountains.
is it water
Mountains.
or is it rocks? I see both.
I did this particular painting.
I see both. So
yeah, it could be
I
both.
said, I'm sorry because all the Chinese know about it, but for the Westerns, we don't know that yin and yang. That's why I talked about the Book of Changes. So sorry because I was very schematical, and I wanted to. The importance of the painting is that, especially Shanshui painting, is of course the changes, and if you explain it under only yin and yang, of course it's very stupid. And I agree with you, but
no, it's
actually,
fine, it's fine, sure.
actually, the painting has to show these changes, and that's why you see both mountain and water together.
Right.
And when you use the material, the paper is yang, and the ink is yin, but the ink is black, and the paper is white. And when you paint on the paper the rocks are of course yang. So the black becomes yang, and that's the first change. And of course everything changes all the time, and that's the aim of Chinese Shanshui painting. Of course, it is to show the changes. These paintings are very well-known examples. So of course I'm sorry I was very quick, too quick, but of course what counts is the changes. So that's why there is no separation between mountains and waters. They go together. Thank you for your remark. It's completely true.
More questions?
Yes, John. Yeah. Thank you for a very interesting presentation, and I confess my abyssal ignorance of the details of Chinese culture. So I won't focus on that, but what strikes me from a comparative perspective is the way in which the question of contemplation is at the heart of how waterscapes are considered. And contemplation is both a very natural, universal human activity and one that is encoded in culturally very diverse ways. Sitting on a cliff watching the raging ocean is not the same thing as sitting at a vantage point in a traditional garden and looking at its characteristic features and its the carefully placed rocks which resonate with the largely still but also sometimes flowing water and so on. How would you present the characteristics and the differences both within Chinese culture over time, or between regions, social classes, or whatever, and between Chinese culture and the European cult in particular of the wild ocean? And what can we draw from that in terms of the understanding of what is to be contemplated and what it is to contemplate?
Well, first of all, in the Chinese painting tradition, you never have an ocean, except what I said, the ocean as a metaphorical conception where you can contemplate, which is this ocean is something which is completely imaginary. But in China, the lakes, the rivers are very strong and very powerful, very powerful. So I think that the wild is present, is there too, but it's not for, you can contemplate in front of it, and of course you can, but what counts is the dialogue with it, so that although it is so powerful and it has so much possibilities to destroy everything. Although this force is so strong, you can negotiate with it and get it and have a harmony. This is the aim. And I'm not sure that the aim is so different in front of the ocean in Western Europe. But
maybe a follow-up question then. It's striking that in European literature and visual representations, there's a quite strongly anthropomorphic relation to water. It is seen as embodying human qualities and defects, including abnormal qualities and terrible defects. And that personification, of course, is connected to the history of polytheism. We were talking yesterday about the Odyssey. Is that anthropomorphic tendency something that you find in your studies, or is because the way you just summarized it implies a non-anthropomorphic relation to the water body?
The water body is a dragon. The dragon can be in the mountain, young, or can be in the water. It can go to heaven, and it can be inside the water of the yellow river or the blue river, Yangtze. So the dragon is the water. The water is the dragon. That's what we saw yesterday in Musée Guimet, right? So no, it's not anthropomorphic at all. Never.
Thank you. Interesting.
Thank you for your question.
May I follow up on this a little bit? I think the Western ways of contemplation on nature is very anthropocentric.
Yes.
And therefore, like before the Romantic period, and the human relationship with the nature is always one of contention relationship, because you're always in position of feeling being threatened by nature, and that and in Chinese shanshui or landscape poetry or painting, it's always an attempt to merge with nature, rather than anthropocentric. You are constantly feeling that you are separated from nature and being threatened by nature. So there's a big difference there. Yeah, and so even after actually the rise of Romanticism, sublime, the feeling of sublime is always portrayed as the kind of the feeling that you get from beauty, natural beauty. Whereas the beautiful part of it is kind of downplayed until much later, when Western, gardening, not gardening, but Western gardens become a fashion. Then you gradually
after the sublime, you have the picturesque.
Right.
Yeah.
So after you domesticated the landscape, then you have more of a tendency toward contemplating the beautiful. But before it was always like sublime.
It was called, but before it was called sublime, it was considered like horrific.
Yeah,
Mountain
exactly.
was considered as
Yeah,
horrific.
so inaccessible, basically.
And horrific, terrifying.
Right, that's right.
Either way.
Right, even during Romanticism, you have the paintings by Friedrich, right? Yeah. Friedrich, his paintings always, about sublime feelings. Ships sinking on the sea, people standing on top of the mountains, looking into the endless stretch of mountains.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a kind of a sublime intent to show the sublime, as they have inherited from the aesthetic of Kant. Yeah.
It's just like Courbet in front of the wave.
Right.
Courbet painting several waves.
Right. Sure.
And when you see the painting, you feel uncomfortable.
Sure. You feel
the purpose is to make you feel uncomfortable.
Exactly.
And whereas in Chinese painting, of course, you always feel comfortable. You always feel like being in front of something where you can meditate.
Meditate and becoming
Like in the
one
garden.
with, to merge into.
I think that's a really good point for literature.
Well, I think contemplation definitely is a great concept to look at the Chinese landscape painting. Let's take this as an example. The contemplation does not fixate it in a certain one point or singular point. It has to be multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
In other words, it's not someone or a person or human being situated at a certain point of this painting or this landscape to watch or to gaze the picture, but rather to immerse itself, the subject, into the picture and following, for instance,
And
the
walk.
mountain road and the rock and the river and go all the way. And then you shift your perspective all the time. It's that flow and fluidity, and you shift your perspective, multiple perspective, all the way, up to the heaven. So that
It's not up to the heaven. I don't agree. It's, no.
Well, you go all the way.
No. You have to. You do a cycle.
See, you do the cycle, and then the mountain goes all the way up.
Yeah, but it goes down as well with the water.
What? Yeah, but you start from the very bottom of the painting. You go all the way up.
Yeah, you can. Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Well,
Well, my point is that you shift your perspectives all the time.
Yes, that's
so
right.
if you have ever contemplate at all, it's a contemplation that flow with the landscape.
That's right. The painting has to be painted with what is called three distances. First, you look at the painting. You look at the mountain. It's up, so that's the first distance, high distance. And then you walk up the mountain and you turn back. Oh, this is deep distance.
Right.
You see far away. And then you go on, and then you get up the mountain, and you see at the height of your eyes. And this is the flat distance. These three distances, you have them in all the paintings. And of course, it's three points of view and three different ways to contemplate. Thank you.
Just one last. I don't want to get us too late for the presentation of Desmond, so Louise, you have asked me to ask a question.
Very brief. Oh, if you want to go
If
first.
you want to go
Gilbert,
first, yes.
Okay. No, it's very interesting, your point of view. But I was wondering, how would you compare Chinese paintings of water with, like, the famous Japanese Hokusai, and also maybe the British painter Turner?
Yeah.
Seems to me that, what you described is that the water or the, river is kind of a very peaceful kind of natural element, or in Chinese poetry at least, the water was sort of has this kind of cleansing power, you sort of erase history and that kind of thing, and it's just part of nature, man and water living together harmoniously. But you look at Hokusai, man is struggling with waves, and Turner is shipwrecked and everything. It's very dangerous and destructive. Now, how would you make something up?
Well, Japanese are not Chinese. Japanese painting is different from Chinese painting.
Yeah.
You know that in traditional Chinese painting, painters get into their paintings. So you never have a painting of war in Chinese tradition. In Japanese tradition, you have paintings of wars, you have paintings of water and of ocean, which are very terrific. And you never have that in China. So you have a big difference between Chinese painting and Japanese painting. The Japanese are turned towards the ocean. They admire the ocean and they like it, they paint it. The Chinese never paint the ocean, never, ever. So that it's a big difference, yeah. And with Turner, well, Turner was, it's a 19th century painter, so he paints the smog in England. It's quite different, yeah.
Okay. Thank
He
you.
belongs to Western tradition, for sure.
Luis, definitely a last question because we have to move on.
Very fast. I think
Otherwise, we don't
it
have
was a
lunch.
wonderful presentation you made. This morning in the van, some of us were talking about the mindsets in the Mediterranean tradition and in Asian traditions, and the notion of progress and a synthetic kind of approach to dialectics. And the way I see it is, even in the concept of landscape versus shanshui, is that the concept of landscape is perceived from without. You look at it and you describe it, and it's morphological. So it's the shape of the land. Whereas in Chinese, it's anatomical, it's from within, it's the characteristics, the mountain, the water. And what is interesting, because I'm a prehistorian, okay, so when I look at representations in the past, and if we look at how the Aborigines, for example, describe rock art, they always describe from within. So the only cultural tradition that describes things from without. So in that sense, even in Europe, if you go to prehistoric rock art, so to pre-classical art, the descriptions are from within. So and the water, for example, is very important. It's associated to the old myths in the Mediterranean, and it's there, and it's embedded, and curiously enough, it's the water and the mountain. In southern France, in Montego, Volcamonica, also in Iberia, and then there's something changes, and I think it changes philosophically. So when you get this idea that instead of having two poles that eternally transform one into the other, and so in the sense go back in circles, you get this idea that no, it's a spiral, and it's continually evolving. And in that sense, I would say even in certainly in European painting, and I don't know about Japan that much, but probably it would be the same kind of argument. Also, waterscapes are not represented until modernity, because the representation of the sea is either the space of danger, is wilderness, and if it's wilderness, it's not part of the landscape, because the landscape is something you master. The logic is you know what is there because you control it, and that's Turner, for example. Although it's of course this revolt sea and so on, nevertheless. It comes in a moment when the humans know how to master. And Okusa is the same thing, I would say, to a certain extent.
Yes, thank you very much.
It was a comment, but I actually took a lot of notes of what you said.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis.
Sorry, Desmond.
Thank you, Len. Desmond, so we will be going to lunch a little bit later. It's not a huge problem, so...
Okay, thank you. Now, my presentation is on this famous Chinese water management project called Dujiangyan. And in fact, over the course of the last 2 days, I think it's been mentioned several times. And it's a subject that probably should not be missed in any discussion on waterscape management in China and Chinese culture, right? And yesterday, our colleague Professor Chen Xia and also Professor Sun Xiaochen from Beijing presented a paper on the Taoist philosophy of water management in Chinese culture and described already very vividly the case of Dujiangyan, but without pictures. So without knowing the content of the paper, I have also prepared my presentation on the case. And I hope with some pictures and images, you would have a more thorough understanding of the wisdom behind the project. Now, first of all, the connection of the project with Taoism is not simply metaphorical, because the water project site is really next to the birthplace of Taoism in Chinese culture. I think in the separation of about 300 to 400 years, called the Mount Qingchen, Qingchenshan, right? Where when in the year of 2000, Duzhangyan was inscribed by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. The inscription is, in fact, for both sites, is Duzhangyan and also Qingchengshan. Right? So I would show you more about, this relationship. Now, Duzhangyan is an irrigation and waterscape management system constructed since the 3rd century BC, which is still in use today. And compared to other famous waterscape management projects in the world, such as the irrigation systems and canals by Hammurabi for the river Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia of ancient Babylon, or the Aqua Appia of Rome, which have long vanished, Duzhangyan has continued to serve its purpose for over 2,200 years as a living heritage of mankind. Here you see some of the pictures now of Duzhangyan and also Qingchengshan, right? And this is really the overview of the site. This is actually from a high point, looking at the river Bianjiang, flowing from the high mountains down to this Sichuan plain, the Chengdu plain. Right? And it began, in fact, when we look at it now today, it's something which is good for people. So it's actually done for the common people. But in fact, the original intention was really part of a military campaign, military strategy of the Empire Qin, when actually that was in the warring period, the Zhangguo Sidai. And Qin Zhao Wang accepted, this advice to tame this river so that the river could allow him to transport, the materials and food and supplies, to the army that he was trying to conquer his neighbor, Chu Guo, and also, these 6 other states during this warring period. So this actually was the motivation for the project. And then they called Li Bing, this is a young engineer in his 30s. In fact, his hometown was in Shanxi, Yuncheng. And he came to Duzhangyan and to take up this task of seeing how to tame the river. Because the river actually, if you look at the, I'll show you the map. Now this is actually, where the mountain, where the water comes from, right? Now, these are some of the heritage, left around the site. So this is Qingchengshan. And this is the map showing you where the river coming down would actually flood, the plain. And it caused actually a lot of damage and distress, to the people living in the Sichuan basin, In fact, the immediate city, the closest city is Chengdu, right? which is one of the, now of course, one of the most beautiful city in China that you want to visit. And it's all thanks to the project. That for 2,000 years, it has really transformed, this whole province into, the province of really food and supplies. 天府之国, right? This is really the rich reserve for China. And in fact, whenever there is a kind of rival fights, between the different governments and parties, they will retreat, to Sichuan, and they would stay here, protected, because of this creation of this rich basin by the irrigation of the river, right? So the year was 256 BC, when Li Bing came to the place. And this actually, is a map showing you the inscription, the extent of inscription of the UNESCO heritage sites, right? So, Du Zhang Yan, sorry, you can't see the red point, but actually it's in the middle, right? And then Qingchengshan is actually to the lower left, right? And this is the whole area where, the Mingjiang and its tributaries are flowing to Chengdu. So you can see, this is where Duzhangying is, right? And then this actually is the Sichuan Pandi, right? Where the river actually, provides, the nourishing of, the crops and so on. And if you look at the geography, this is, see how the rivers actually, are feeding, down to the Sichuan area. And the relationship of the project with Chengdu, right, is really very close. And this is, in a way, showing you, the strategic position of this project to the development of urban and the rural life down the river. So what Li Bing did, in fact, the whole project consisted of 3 major moves, that he did, by looking at the flowing of the river. First, you see the river coming down from the upstreams. He identified, the bend where the river will turn in, and he anchored, this spot called the fish mouth, Yuzhui, which is actually the point of diversion for the river. So part of the river will flow to the right, which is called the inner river, and part of the river would flow on the outer left, which is the Guaijiang, the outer river. And very curiously, he observes that, because of the high tide and the low tide, during the high tide, where there's a lot of water coming down, if you could maintain the divide of the river in 40% and 60%, then the river will not overflood, will not actually flood the area, right? So this Yuzhui actually has a very important function of making this division. During the high tide, 40% of water would go to the inner river. But during the low tide, when there's less water, it would divide 60% of water actually flowing into the inner river. So in that way, it will maintain a regular flow in proportion to the amount of water that you will need for the irrigation without causing any flooding. So this Yuzhui is very important. But then of course, Yuzhui itself alone is not enough. You have to do 2 more things. You have to do 2 more things in order to make sure this 6 and 4 division really works. The second thing actually is called the Baopingko, right? The treasure bottleneck. In fact, this is a, you see the three red marks on the map, right? The lower right is the Baopingko, is the treasure bottleneck. And this actually was not there before because it was part of the mountain. So he had to painstakingly break through, this gap through the mountain in order to allow the water to come through. Okay? Now, this is also the second example of how ingenious he was. At that time, when no dynamite was invented yet, right? So there was no dynamite. And he only used these natural principles of expansion and contraction by fire, burning, the rocks, so that, the rocks would expand, and then quickly use water to cool it down, so that they will contract. So by expansion and contraction, the rocks would disintegrate by themselves. And through this process, he managed to break through, the mountain and created this gap, right, called the Baopingko. So that Baopingko allows the water to flow according to this 6 and 4 proportion. Right? Now, these two things are not enough. He needs to do the third thing in order to make sure water really flows naturally, and will not cause flooding. Because the river, when they come down from the mountain, they carry a lot of sand and rubbles in the water. And if you allow the water to go through, the narrower inner river, they might clog up the river. So what he did was he created a man-made weir, okay, called the Fei Sha Yan, right? And this is actually a little island, right? The artificial island over there, right? The left lower corner, where the river, when the inner river water comes through, they will naturally bring the sediments from the river over, this Fei Sha Yan to flow out into the outer river. So the Fei Sha Yan actually serves the function of filtering, the rubbles and the sand, in order to make sure that, the inner flow would be smooth without any obstruction. So having done these 3 projects, in a way, these 3 separate projects, he succeeded in keeping, this Minjiang river flow according to this 6-4 proportion, so that there's a constant supply of water for irrigation to the Sichuan basin. Right? And of course, when he accomplished this, it's not the end of the story, right? Because over time, the river flow would probably destroy some of these foundations. So you have to keep, maintaining it. And therefore, I think I will show you at the end, they summarize the major principles in the Duzhangyan design. And one of the criteria is that you need to maintain it annually, every year, right? So this is how it works. So Li Bing's accomplishment was really inspired by the principles of diversion instead of building of dams. And that, in that sense, he was really inspired by the great Yu, who was the first legendary hero of taming the Yellow River in the same manner, right? Using diversion instead of building dams. So in the site, you will see, there's a separate temple dedicated to Yu. And then later on, they built a temple dedicated to Li Bing and his son, right? And they call them the 2 kings, Wang Miao, right? The 2 kings temple. So all right, so this is basically how he did, the project. So over the, okay, so this is another diagram showing you, the location of the river, the three projects, the fish mouth, the bottleneck, and also the flying sand weir. Again, in a more diagrammatic image. Then this is actually a more recent discovery. This actually is living, but the statue was made in East Han, so it's around 160 AD. But it was discovered actually in 1974 in the riverbed, certain parts of the riverbed. So they now put up this statue as a worship in the temple. And as I said, you need to maintain it. And now they actually build a park to show you how they do it, with some of these engineering objects, right? So the four metal bars in the middle, they are in fact, iron, and they call them the 卧铁, lying iron. Right? These iron actually are put down in the river to ensure that, it will not, the mud will not actually cause the obstruction. And it's interesting that in this park, they put up these four bars, each representing one historical period of reign in the Chinese kingdoms. The first one was in Ming, second one in Qing, third one is in 中华民国, the Republic of China, and the last one was the People's Republic of China. Right? So these four iron bars laid down in the park, each representing four different periods of reigning in the Chinese territory. Right? And then surrounding the circle, you see these baskets, right? And the basket actually have stones inside. And in fact, these are the devices they use to lay down on the foundation to anchor, all these flow for the water, which is actually, they have a name called ma cha, right? And this is actually how they did it. But of course, in the modern times, they replace them, by concrete. So nowadays, when they do the maintenance, they will use concrete, in the river. And of course, over the period of 2,000 years, there were many famous figures contributed to the maintenance and the management of this project. With his more contemporary view downstreams, right? One of these figures was Zhuge Liang, right? So, and Zhuge Liang, of course, is one of the heroes from the Three Kingdoms, right? And he was the one who approved, these construction projects of Dujiangyan. When Su Guo, the Su kingdom was building up their base, around Sichuan, right? So this actually is one of the example. The accumulation of the work and the addition of the project built up a wealth of heritage and humanistic treasures around the site, and also on the Mount Qingcheng, including the temples and dedication to Li Bing and others. So to recognize its value, UNESCO inscribed both Dujiangyan and Mount Qingcheng as World Heritage Sites in 2000. And now if you read from UNESCO's inscription. Well, let me show you a few pictures of the project first, right? I mean, this is how the first one is the Yujie, right? And then it's actually flowing down on the two rivers. Okay. So this is when you take a closer look, how it looks, right? This fish mouth. And this is actually the gap where, you know, he breaks through, you know, the mountain, right? The Baobingkou. And then you see, you know, the river flow. And of course, you know, they now also build bridges so that you could do the maintenance, right? So these are all part of the heritage, the cultural heritage around the site. And these are some of the sorry. Okay. So when they inscribe it as World Heritage Sites, they of course, you know, would look at, you know, the projects, whether they would have, you know, this OUV, the outstanding universal value. And in the in the synthesis or synopsis, they would describe Duzhangyan irrigation system is an ecological engineering feat originally constructed around 256 BC, modified and enlarged during the Tang, Song, Yun, and Ming dynasties. It uses natural topographic and hydrological features to solve problems of diverting water for irrigation, draining sediment, flood control, and flow control without the use of dams. Today, the system comprises two parts: the weir works, located at an altitude of 726 meters, the highest point of the Chengdu Plain, 1 kilometer from Duzhangyan city, and the irrigated area. And three key components identified, as I mentioned, you know, the fish mouth, the frying sand weir, and also, you know, the bottleneck. And together with other dikes and also passages, as well as a floodgate, the embankment and watercourse ensure a regular supply of water to the Chengdu Plains. The system has produced comprehensive benefits in flood control, irrigation, water and transport, and general water consumption. Began over 2,250 years ago, it now irrigates 668,700 hectares of farmland, right? Now, Mount Qingcheng, which is next to the site, dominating the Chengdu Plains to the south of Duzhangyan, is a mountain famous in Chinese history as the place where, in the year 142, the philosopher Zhang Ling, or Zhang Daoling, okay, founded the doctrine of Chinese Taoism. And most of the essential elements of Taoism culture are embodied in the teachings of Taoism that emanated from the temple, were subsequently built on the mountain during the Jing and the Tang dynasties. The mountain resumed its role as the intellectual and spiritual center of Taoism in the 17th century. The 11 important Taoist temples on the mountain reflect the traditional architecture of Western Sichuan, and so on, right? So this is actually how they value the sites, taking, you know, the criteria 2, 4, and 6 from the original cultural heritage criteria, right? Which, of course, you know, is a remarkable technology management project, right, which is still functioning. And then the second, the fourth criteria is that it's really advances in science and technology from ancient China, which is illustrated by the system. And then finally, is on Mount Qingchen, right, when in fact, the site is related to actual activities and practices of Taoism, and therefore a very influential region of East Asia for a long period of history. So, and of course, they also cited the reason that in terms of integrity and authenticity, the projects really fulfill these criteria. So finally, I will show you the summary of the principles of the water management in the project, which have been put up actually on the walls of this Wang Temple, the Two Kings Temple. And there are a few sayings which actually reflect, this idea of following nature. Right? The first one, well, in fact, this 生陶汤地柱宴, right? In fact, are the first 6 words of a 60-word long poem, right? Which I will show you. But then they also have these other saying, like 月蛙结角, 逢正抽薪, right? I mean, these are exactly the principles that in English translation, it means that whenever you encounter a tricky bend, you cut off the corners. And then when the flow is straight, then you will try to draw currents to the center. Right? These are the principles that really reflect, the philosophy of Taoism. And then, of course, another one is 程式力道, 因时制宜, right? Means harness the momentum and steer it to the advantage, tailor the measure to the time and the circumstances. And let's go back to this 60-word poem, right? I mean, if you read them carefully, there are in fact 20 triplets. And these 20 triplets in fact teaches you all you need to know in terms of how you manage the project. And many people actually take these teaching at heart and inspire, that they would also tackle problems, in their respective sector. Now, I have in fact translated these 60 words. I could just quickly read it out, so you understand what the words mean, right? It means to dredge the shrouds deep, to build the weirs low. This 6-character maxim is a lesson for the ages. Excavate river sand, heap up the embankments, lay the masonry at the fish mouth spur, set up the ship pan creepworks, erect wave-picking gaps, bore the leaky jar, which is the watercock, weave the cages densely, pack the stones firm, divide the flow 4 to 6, right? This is the concept. Balance flood and drought, mark the water lines, keep the iron piles in sight, repair diligently each year, prevent troubles in advance, follow the old system, do not alter it at will easily. Right? So this is the whole summary of what these 60 words actually is teaching you. So, Oh, okay, I have the All right, so you could follow this, okay? Now, last but not least, in the context of the conference being organized and held at Excelia Business School, I believe it would be appropriate to end my presentation by citing the reference that Du Zhangyan has inspired many important people, including the founder of Huawei, right? Ren Zhengfei, right? Who publicly acknowledged that he learned from Du Zhangyan the water management idea in how he would run the business of Huawei. Particularly, you know, these first 6 words, right? 生陶汤, 地作宴. He interprets it to dredge the showers deep means to search as deep as possible the talents and the resources of the company. And to build the weirs low, to him, is really, there is a optimum level of profit. You cannot make it too high or too low, right? In order that, you know, the business would run sustainably. All right, so these actually were what he took from Du Zhangyan as a guiding principles of the business of Huawei. Right? And as a living heritage that has inspired from the birth of Taoism to the founding of Huawei, I believe Du Zhangyan would certainly continue to inspire us how to live with nature for many decades to come. Thank you.
I love that comparison with and I think that we in management sciences we have a lot to learn from the Chinese and from the what you just told us.
Yeah.
You just have to look to good examples. So I particularly like very much the company, so that's why.
There are other famous people too, but I think Ren Zhengfei is the most appropriate in this context. Yeah.
So any comments and questions?
Yes, I thought also it was very interesting. I was thinking about what is, if you should describe it in systematic philosophical terms, what is actually happening. You have a kind of wisdom, life wisdom, or religious wisdom with Taoism that you are able to translate into practical knowledge, which is in harmony with nature.
Yeah.
And I think if you say this is the idea, then if you compare to the Western thinking, in many Western approaches to nature, there would not be this spiritual element in the structure of a waterscape system or an engineering system. But what is actually happening in terms of spirituality from the Taoist into the practical management? How would you describe this?
Well, I think it's all in the summary. All these saying, you know, in fact, reflect, you know, a certain idea that there's similarity with Taoist philosophy. Right? You work with the circumstances. You work with the time. You work with the site, right? And then you, whenever you encounter a problem, you try to avoid it, and to alleviate the problem, you know, by nature itself, rather than by force. Right? So I think these are very, very Taoist.
but what it is, it's a wisdom of life translated into the engineering of waterscape management.
Yeah. But interestingly, if you look at the sequence of events, the project was there before, you know, the Taoism was founded, right? So people learn from the actual practice, right?
Ah, yes.
Yeah. But of course, Taoist philosophy existed before that. But when it was founded as a religion, it was, in a way, inspired by the practice. Yeah.
More questions? Could I ask
Yes, of course. Precisely following on from your point about the relation between practice and theory, these maxims for watercourse management, which are very practical, are also contextual. And there's an important question about their generalization. And generalizing them through theory or philosophy is obviously one way of generalizing, but because they are anchored in practice, one would assume that their generalization should itself be contextual. So in pointing to the fact that these maxims have been given broader application, including in the management of things that are not watercourses, how has that balance worked out over time? Particularly the, essentially the prohibition on innovation. Do it the old way. Don't try to innovate. That inevitably is sometimes not going to work. So is there any evidence here of how the dynamic of practice
you capture
challenges the dynamic
gist of
of theory?
the problem? I think it's always the last two that people challenge, And
well, the
therefore,
4-to-6 ratio, for instance,
yes,
that might have a theoretical basis, and if we had a water engineer here, perhaps they would say, yeah, 4-to-6 or 3-to-2 is theoretically justified. But one would also assume that it has something to do with the specifics of a particular site, and that 4-to-6 in another site might be 5-to-8 or something.
yeah.
So do we have any evidence of how that works in the way these maxims are used?
Not apparently. You always take the teaching as a kind of guiding principles, right? But the specific, whether it's really 4-6 or 3-5 or 7-2 or whatever, as you say, I think you have to really adapt it to your own circumstances, which I believe, Ren Zhengfei, could well do, right?
So does that mean that when you adapt it, you probably wouldn't say so? You wouldn't say, we've changed the ratio. You would simply change the ratio without saying it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah?
when you use it, you will use it metaphorically. Yeah,
It's about interpretation. Huh?
yeah.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Questions? No? Okay, so thank you. So now we are actually a little bit earlier, 4 minutes earlier than expected. So we will go now to the restaurant to have lunch, and then we can come back here so you can leave your things, and then we take the vans